Hello everybody, my name is Zhenji, and today I would like to give a small talk about incorporating intrinsic flexibility effect into amorphous absorption properties simulation at a low computational cost. To start with, I would like to give a background introduction towards this project. So mental organic frameworks, which is MOFs, consist of more organic linkers and metal ions or clusters, and MOFs have been widely used in gas absorption. Separation and capture of gas utilizing MOFs are challenging but promising. And what is MOF flexibility? Compared to zeolites, MOFs are flexible and have a strong influence on absorption properties. There are mainly two types of flexibility. The first type is intrinsic flexibility, which is the atomic vibration and linker motion without volume change, which occurs in all materials. And it's just the illustration of that type of flexibility is shown in the figure in the middle. And another type of flexibility is extrinsic flexibility, which is triggered by adsorbate, temperature or pressure, etc. So the figure on the bottom is an illustration of the extrinsic flexibility triggered by adsorbate. Some well-known MOF properties, such as breathing, swelling, are or one of that kind. However, this study will focus our research on the extrinsic flexibility. The intrinsic flexibility is less discussed, but it has been shown to be important for MOF absorption properties, especially when kinetic diameter of absorption molecules are comparable with the MOF pore size. So the Myung and his co-workers examined absorption of 9 molecules in 100 MOFs at dilute and non-dilute absorption conditions, which show that absorption at dilute loadings and selectivities can be significantly affected by flexibility. The figure on the top is one of their research outcome. The x-axis is the Henry constant ratio of flexible results and rigid results. And according to the y-axis, which is a fraction of MOFs, we can see a large portion of MOFs is highly influenced by intrinsic flexibility in terms of the Henry constant prediction. And there's more studies discussing this topic. For example, Park and his co-workers found that the intrinsic flexibility of MOFs have a non-trivial impact on surface activity absorption modeling. As you can see the figure on the bottom, the x-axis is the selectivity in rigid structure, and the y-axis is the selectivity after taking intrinsic flexibility into consideration. And from this parity plot, we can see the incorporation of intrinsic flexibility definitely changes selectivity for serine absorption. So what is our current way for intrinsic flexibility modeling? The quantum mechanism level simulations are not affordable in those systems because there's just too much atom for this quantum level of simulation. And currently molecular dynamics are used to model the intrinsic flexibility. However, there's two major drawbacks of MD. The first one is reliable force fields are not always available. Second is it takes lots of effort to build the model. So we would like to think about a way to model the intrinsic flexibility at a much lower cost because intrinsic flexibility exists in every MOFs. And we try to study our modeling based on the experimental information. So what is the available experimental information on intrinsic flexibility? There is a parameter called atomic displacement parameters, also known as atomic vibration parameters or thermal parameters. These parameters are used to represent the displacement ellipsoids. The displacement ellipsoids are mainly the description of the atom vibration around these equilibrium positions, and it's available in every standard C files, and it's obtained from the XRD. So in this slide, I would like to discuss the model details of how we generate the flexible snapshot and try to incorporate the intrinsic flexibility into the morphosorption modeling. So first, snapshot method is used to statistically assess the flexibility impact. The snapshot method is a computational approximation to bring down the computational cost by separating morph framework movement and absorption process, which is validated and used by previous research. And then we generate snapshots from experimental crystal structures by assuming Gaussian distribution of atomic positions and fixing hydrogen atom distance to heavy atoms be constant at experimental volume. And then we correlate neighborhood atoms by average displacement. And we rate scale temperature from experimental data using Boltzmann distribution. And this workflow in the bottom of the slides is the illustration of our newly developed ellipsoid method. So the only input for our ellipsoid method is the experimental zip file. And this zip file will go through in-house Python code, which will help you to generate flexible structure snapshots. By combining these snapshots with default setting for snapshot method, and then go through TSMC, we'll get a absorption property prediction with flexible influence considered. So these slides, I will get a quick summary for the thing I have talked so far and give a model illustration. So traditionally, rigid structure is used to give the absorption properties. However, previous research showed that intrinsic flexibility has non-trivial influence on absorption properties, which means if you allow the atom to vibrate around its equilibrium position or the linker to rotate around its equilibrium position, the absorption result you get will be different than the one you get from the rigid structure. However, molecular dynamics is currently used to describe the morph framework movement, which is not an easy task. So, based on the experimental information, we have developed a new model with much lower computational cost, and which of course is much easier to implement it. So, how can we measure the simulation results? So qualitatively, intrinsic flexibility is important if the p-volume of one sample 1 till t-test is less than 0.1 or greater than 0.9 for results from flexible snapshots and rigid structure. Quantitatively, if flexibility importance less than 0.9 or greater than 1.1, we consider the intrinsic flexibility to be important. So what is the flexibility importance? It's barely a ratio of flexible structure absorption mean volume divided by the rigid structure absorption volume. So let's move into the third part, which is the model validation. So we picked 20 random morphs from CoMorph database to predict the absorption at dilute or non-dilute condition of 7-isobate. We then used MD and its ellipsoid model to give flexible morph framework absorption property predictions. So the simulation results is shown in the bottom. According to the MD result, intrinsic flexibility is important in 55 cases out of 140 cases, and 29 in dilute cases. Prediction from ellipsoid method are compared with prediction from MD, and two sets of predictions are qualitatively consistent in around 85%, and quantitatively consist in around 40%. So here, we picked 5 morph example out of 20 morphs as the example. So we can see in the figure, all the blue dots are the prediction from ellipsoid model, and all the orange dots are the prediction from the molecular dynamic prediction. The y-axis is the flexibility importance, which is the ratio of flexible absorption properties to the rigid absorption properties. And the axis on the left is the experimental rigid structure uptake, and the y-axis on the right is experimental rigid structure Henry constant. As you can see, almost in every case, both methods have qualitatively agreement with each other. But in terms of quantitative prediction, sometimes these two methods varies a little bit. So our conclusion is that our ellipsoid model qualitatively predicts the importance of more flexibility on absorption. In this slide, I would like to discuss the result from our model application. This slide consists of the intrinsic flexibility importance in anion pilotomorphs. We picked 4 anion pilotomorphs to simulate absorption isotherms using 3 different rigid structures and 2 different flexible structures. Here is 2 examples of simulated results, which are compared with experimental done by Cui and his co-workers. For the figure on the left, we can see 3 rigid structure isotherm predictions and 2 flexible structure isotherm predictions all have a reasonable agreement with the experimental observation. So in this case, the intrinsic flexibility does not influence our absorption properties. For the right cases, it's a little bit more complicated. We can see all the 3 different rigid structures give very different predictions if we refer to this black dot, which are the experimental results. And the red line and this purple line, which represent the flexible structure predictions, they are much closer to the experimental observation. So the conclusion from this slide is first, often the rigid results do not agree with experimental isotherms. And second, our ellipsoid method qualitatively predicts the importance of more flexibility on isotherms, but a more accurate method is needed to fully capture the experimental isotherms. We also applied our model on amorphous materials. Because our ellipsoid method can give a qualitative prediction of the importance of more flexibility without using force field. So we're extending to amorphous material database developed by Ragu recently, where access to reliable or transferable force field is challenging. However, there's 2 simulation details we need to take care of. The first one is none of this structure come directly from experimental data, which means the atomic displacement parameters we previously used are not directly available. We want to tackle this problem by using average displacement parameter from a collection of crystal materials. For example, in amorphous ZIF materials in database, atomic displacement parameters from crystal ZIF experimental data will be used. If corresponding crystal materials are not available, the mean displacement from COMOF database will be used. Here we picked PIP3 as the example, because there's no accurate force field is available to describe the framework. So we use the mean displacement from COMOF database. And in this case, the influence of intrinsic flexibility on the absorption of semi-isobates as both dilute and non-dilute cases are not important, but still this is well illustration of our model application on amorphous material. So in summary, a method that can give a qualitative prediction of the importance of more flexibility on absorption without using force field for morph is developed and validated using 20 morphs from COMOF database. And we have applied a new method on anion morphs and amorphous materials. This new method can be used for newly synthesized materials. Rapidly assess if intrinsic flexibility matters for potential absorption application. And this method can also be used before building a complex model and have a general idea of whether it is worthwhile to actually build a complex model. And also this new method can be used for materials where access to a reliable or transferable force field is challenging. Finally, I would like to acknowledge the funding, the DOE, and the show group members, which gave me a lot of support during the research. And thanks for listening to my talk, and I would like to take any questions or comments. Thanks.